the group that you've got here that we're seeing seems like it has all of those components as well, right?
Yes, definitely. I have a very mixed crowd. I don't focus on one specific area of training over the other. Like, I'm not military centric, I'm not law enforcement centric, and I'm not citizen centric. I try to say, hey, everybody can get something out of each class. So I'll have classes that are what we call open enrollment, which means anybody can sign up as long as they pass the background check and everything like that. And I'll get off-duty cops, like, uniform cops, detectives, guys that work narco, things like that, who come through what's considered a citizen class, because once you get involved in training, you realize that it's not for my profession, but I'm still going to be able to get some out of it.
What is the most important thing a student can get out of being in one of your classes?
I think the most important thing a student's going to get is the realization that, like, for firearms, for self-defense with a firearm, that being able to mechanically work the gun is literally like the lowest level of operation. It's the beginning. Now, we need to get more and more proficient with the use of a firearm, but just being able to run the gun isn't enough. You need to understand when to use the gun, how to best employ the gun, and then factoring in a 360-degree environment, working in a real-life situation where you don't have a convenient berm or backdrop. You're not against a paper target. You're actually dealing with human beings. So it makes things, and I don't want to use like a quote-unquote word, but it does make things more dynamic, and you have to process situations quicker. So I think the most important thing a student can get is realizing that they need to develop mental and physical tools as well as the mechanical ability to run the gun.
Seen some different reactions from the students who've run the simulations even thus far.
Yeah.
The gentleman who just got done, that's the bank robbery kind of scenario. How would you explain his reaction? Because he seemed dazed and confused by his own admission over here.
I think he processed things really quickly. Like, he recognized the threat really fast. But he maybe didn't give himself time to decide what exactly was happening, and I don't think he weighed what he was facing, because he was up against two bad guys who were both wearing body armor and they had rifles. He carries a handgun, and obviously he's not wearing any kind of armor or anything like that. He didn't position himself as well as he could have, and he maybe didn't process the fact that this is a profit crime, so these guys are hopefully just here for the money and they won't hurt anybody. Because sometimes the best thing a gun owner can do is kind of realize that, you know what, this isn't a fight that I need to get involved in, or this is a fight that I can't win, so I need to wait until I get to a position of advantage and be able to engage.
How important is it for gun owners and the large part of the population, non-gun owners, to understand that really that responsibility comes down to the choice? Do I get involved? Do I take action with that weapon I have? Or do I make the choice not to?
Yeah, every class I teach is with the impetus that you make that decision. It's not a will do, it's a may do. You find yourself in a situation where either you decide to get involved, or in certain situations where you're forced to get involved. But there's always the choice on what to do and if to get involved. Like this particular class, it's based on you making the decision. Because unless you're directly targeted by the shooter, you don't have to actually get involved. It's a moral and an ethical decision that's completely personal.
How does what we've seen in the last several months, you referenced some instances in class, how do the terror attack in San Bernardino, or a shooting and the terror attack in Paris, or other mass shootings, how do you think that influences the desire for people to come and get the training that you're offering?
I think especially in the Second Amendment community, pro-gun community, carrying CCW community, whatever term you want to use, I think that the training has been available for a while. I know I've offered it for a few years, but I've definitely seen a bigger interest in it because things have been more in their face as far as coverage media, and then the constant 24-hour news cycle really drives home the point that it's unlikely that you'll ever be involved in that situation, but if you are, it's not what you've been practicing for. So what's different, and where can I go to get the training that's going to help me understand what's different?
One of the things you've talked about in the classroom, and now I've seen it here when we're doing the scenarios as well, you talked about, hey, you have a mindset like this, you're alpha, I'm going to take charge. You also talked about the reasons that you should choose to get involved or not get involved, and that your considerations aren't like somebody else's.
Yeah.
You've got 3 children and a wife. That's not your situation, so we might decide things differently. Um, how important is that for gun owners to understand, to take into account, to process before they decide, yep, I'm getting in, or no, I'm not?
I think it's incredibly important. I think you have to have a realistic expectation of what role you need to play, or if you need to play a role at all. We, as gun owners, we all have this point where it's not a fantasy, but we think about, okay, well, if a situation happens, I'm prepared. I have the tools to deal with it. That doesn't necessarily mean that you should, or that should be your top priority. If like many of my alumni have children. I don't have children, but they do. So I have to empathize as much as I can with that idea and that fact. That if they're in the mall and they have two of their small children with them, can they just stick their kids in a corner and say, wait here, and then go deal with the shooter? Or should they be using their weapon as strictly as self-defense to get their kids out of there? Or grab as many people as they can and say, follow me, follow me, follow me, let's get out of here. For me, being, no children, I would probably react completely differently, because I don't have those immediate concerns of having an innocent that I have to protect that I know. We're very altruistic by nature as humans, but that lessens the further away we get from who we're related to. So I'm going to try to protect total strangers, but if I have two children, I might just focus completely on them and be like, I need to get these kids out. So it's really, it's understanding your role on what kind of, I guess, social situation you're in when it happens.
How do you feel about the large number of people who have decided, yep, I'm getting a gun to protect myself, but then the training stops there?
Yeah, I think that's entirely irresponsible. Now, I don't believe that the government should be able to mandate you should have X amount of training. I don't agree with that, because who makes the decision? How watered down is it going to be? And so on and so forth. Some states like Georgia, you have no training whatsoever to get your concealed permit. Some states like Texas require an X amount of training. The problem is it might give someone a false sense of security in saying, well, I've taken the course, I've got my permit, I'm done, I'm good. Now, would you trust a medical professional who graduated medical school but never went to any continuing education after that? I wouldn't. I want someone who is constantly learning in some way to maintain their proficiency, not to just reach a low level of functionality and say this is good enough. Saying in law enforcement is, do you want to meet the minimum standards in a gunfight? You shouldn't. And training is how you make sure you excel versus just meet those standards.
Are you seeing a growing interest in the kind of training that you provide?
Yeah, I think so. I definitely noticed that my classes fill faster than maybe they did a year ago. I think that there is, if I can use the term, somewhat of a resurgence in the firearms community, that people are more and more interested in training. Some people seek training strictly for entertainment value. I don't provide entertainment classes, I like to think. But some people seek training out because a friend has gone to a class, a father, a mother, a sister, a brother, a cousin has gone to a class and said, hey, I learned some stuff that I didn't know before, and I think it's very beneficial. I always tell my students, one of the things I tell my students after a class, like, take this knowledge and share it, please, because that's how we fight the myths that exist in self-defense. But make sure you do it in context. So you have become the educator, but you need to make sure that the message is delivered correctly so we avoid people making mistakes because they didn't get the total story. But yeah, I'd say we're on a rise as far as interest in training is concerned.
I briefly threw this out yesterday when we walked in. So I'm like, I think, a lot of people who will be watching our story, have some experience with guns, hunting and target shooting and whatever. Don't currently have a concealed weapons license, or in my case, I don't own a gun.
Okay.
But I've thought more about it lately because of what we've seen in our communities and across the globe. How would you advise somebody like me on whether or not to get the gun, get the weapons license, get the training? Should I or shouldn't I? And how would you tell?
If you're going to do it, you have to be serious about it. You have to make 100% commitment to being responsible. So if you're going to buy a gun, you need to learn how to use it. And that starts with learning how the mechanics. Remember the basic level of education. Learn the mechanics of the gun, learn how to shoot it, learn how to hit a target consistently. But then you have to learn how to draw properly, then you have to learn how to employ lights and things like that. And everybody thinks, well, that's a lot of stuff. but it's really not. It's still, we're still talking about just the fundamentals. There are no necessarily advanced techniques. There's just different employments of the fundamentals. In our community, we have the word tactical that's become really, really cliche. I try to avoid using it altogether because I feel like it gives people an idea that this is somehow something they shouldn't know how to do because it's tactical, and I don't do tactical stuff. I don't do tactical stuff either. What I do is I just best employment of the fundamentals based on the situation. So if you were going to purchase a gun, which is good, because then you're taking personal responsibility for your own life. You're giving yourself the option to defend your life and not have to rely on anybody else to do it for you, which I think everyone should at some level appreciate the fact that now I can take my life into my own hands instead of relying on 911 or relying on someone else to protect me. But again, if you're going to make the decision, you need to reach a certain level of proficiency so that you're safe and so an accident doesn't happen. Because the worst thing is learning how to work the gun, but not learning how to work the gun in the environment that you're in.
Are you, I'm not saying you are, it's just for the question purpose. You talking out of both sides of your mouth here because you're law enforcement, but you're advocating and training citizens how to do the job of law enforcement, or is that a different job?
No, they're not doing the job of law enforcement. The job of law enforcement's main function, in my opinion, is to protect the rights of the people. So if someone is a victim of a criminal act, law enforcement is going to protect their rights by arresting that person and seeing that they are prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law based on the case. But law enforcement very rarely is there to prevent the crime from happening to you. So I am my own person, and if we want to talk psychologically, I have psychological things built into my own reactionary thing, body alarm, fight or flight, whatever you want to say. Self-defense is natural. I will naturally defend myself to a threat. So why not increase my ability to be effective by employing a tool that allows me to level the playing field? Think about a woman who's 5'5" and 110 pounds facing a guy who's 250 pounds and 6'2". How does she level the playing field? Think about a guy who's a 30-year-old overweight carpet layer, and he's facing two 18-year-old kids who are in very good shape, and they both have bats. How does he level the playing field? He has to be able to say, no, I will not comply. And owning a firearm and using that firearm responsibly is how we're able to do that. As law enforcement, I want to be there. But I know realistically it's probably very unlikely.
Can I follow up on that? So, Aaron, we did stories with our own sheriffs who love the fact that homeowners who are licensed to carry have it because they say, you're there before we will ever be. Can you talk a little bit about that's...
Yeah.
And you're still addressing me as you answer her question.
And you think about the gun inside the home. The home is one of the places where we feel the most comfortable, but it's also one of the places where we're going to be the most complacent. You think about a burglary is usually when the bad guy, the criminal, doesn't think you're home. Whereas a home invasion is where he doesn't care. So what are you going to do? A burglary, you come home, things are stolen, you feel victimized. But you didn't actually face your attacker or your potential attacker. In a home invasion, they may want you to be there because they're going to use you to gain access to a safe or get your ATM card and your PIN number or what have you. You cannot rely on their intent. If their intent is to harm you, you have no way of knowing that. They may say, I'm not going to hurt you, and they may very well intend to do so. They may say nothing. Homeowners owning firearms and knowing how to use them and understanding the roles that they can employ the firearm in to protect their home is, I think, very important. I would advise every homeowner, even if you're not going to carry a gun, to at the very least own, understand how to operate the gun safely for the sake of defending your home.
Are there some people who shouldn't own guns?
I think we're already pretty clear on that legally. I think the law already says like this person shouldn't own a gun because they're a violent felon. And I totally agree with that. I think some states actually prevent people from owning guns or certain types of guns. Like if you look at the more restrictive states like California, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, they restrict their citizens' ability to protect themselves. Some states require you to attempt to retreat from a threat before you can defend yourself legally. So you may be involved in a situation where there's a clear threat to your life, but since you didn't attempt to retreat, you may face some kind of criminal charge, which to me is completely nonsensical. Why you would ever have to deal with that. But yeah, I think the law has already set up really good established boundaries for who should and shouldn't have guns, and I think it's something that I definitely agree with. If you've been convicted of a violent felony and you've shown that you cannot appreciate a social contract of I do no harm to you, you do no harm to me, then no, you shouldn't have the right to own a gun.
What about voluntarily? So Are there people that, I don't know if I'd really ever use it? Should I not own a gun? I'm too squeamish even thinking about causing somebody else great bodily harm.
That's a hard decision. That's a hard question for me to answer, actually, because I can't predict another person's intent. My only thing I can say is you come to me when you've made the decision to own a gun. But it would be almost philosophically wrong of me to try to motivate people who didn't want to own guns to own them. I would love if everyone was willing to take their life in their own hands and be responsible for their own protection. But it would be almost disingenuous of me in a way to say, well, you will own a gun.
Right.
Because that's a total different type of, I guess, that's very totalitarian, and I don't want to get involved in that. I don't want to live in a militaristic society. Yeah, you have to be comfortable with violence. Violence is not a bad word, it's just a descriptive term. But we hear violent and we think, oh, that's bad. Violent can be good too. You can use violence for good. My weapon is just a tool. My firearm, that's all it is, it's a tool. It exists to be used in situations where there's no other recourse. It's an extension of my will, that's all it is. And I will exercise the maximum amount of violence I have to stop a threat to my life or a threat to anyone I choose to protect. But at the end, I have to be willing to do that, because if I'm only carrying the gun and I haven't really accepted the reality of the fact that I may need to use this and it's going to be violent, it's going to be chaotic, it's going to be something I've never experienced before, perhaps. And if you're not willing to accept the fact that you will have to use the gun and really think about the potential visceral aspect of that, then you either need to kind of have a personal philosophical conversation with yourself about how things are going to go, or you may want to rethink, are you really serious about this? But I think everyone at their ultimate level is going to be honest with themselves at a certain point, especially if they're taking training classes, and say, yeah, okay, I'm going to have to accept the fact that this can happen. And I think, the students that I get come through my class, if they didn't realize it day one, after a few classes with me or other instructors, they've been like, you know what, I have a more realistic expectation of what might actually happen, and I'm okay with it.
One last thing. So you agreed to do this interview, you agreed to let us come and shoot everything. After everybody watches us, what do you hope they take away from it when they see the story?
And again, that's to me.
I think the most important thing to take away from it is that there's no magic. It's literally like, it's skills, it's technique, it's knowledge, and you combine those all and build on that basic level of education and realize that one student at a time, one citizen at a time, we can make everybody safer. By building on the fact that the better trained we are as a society, the better trained we are as gun owners, the less likely or the harder target we're going to create for anyone that wants to create chaos and death. If someone wants to attack a certain area, say a movie theater or a restaurant or a doctor's office or any number of public locations, they might have to worry about in the back of their head, well, this is a pretty pro-gun state, or this isn't a gun-free zone, or something like that. I'm going to go ahead and try to choose a softer target. Eventually, I would like everybody to say, well, we're not going to have soft targets anymore. Again, and I go back to, I don't want to live in a militaristic society, but I would rather be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in war.
Yeah, I think so too.